Hi, everybody. We're here today for the Demystifying the Edit webinar. Nice to be here with you all. Hopefully you can all see me and hear me. We're going to talk a little bit about editing in a bit more detail. So here's me. I'm Debbie Anderson. I am an employee owner and publishing consultant here at FriesenPress. I've been working for FriesenPress now for almost 14 years and helping a lot of authors get started in their publishing journey, which usually starts with editing. So it's a good topic to be discussing with you all today. I'm also here with our moderator today, our head of marketing, Brian Cliffin. So welcome to him as well. He's going to be on our chat and able to help organize some questions there from you all during our question and answer session. So feel free to pop questions in the chat box as we go, and we'll get to as many as we can after the presentation today, or well, during the presentation, and any that we don't manage to get to, we will reply to you afterwards as well. So we're looking forward to hearing all of those questions as well. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. We're going to be looking at the editing process, learning how to master self-editing, the different types of editing, managing the experience, and how to prepare for the editing process as well. And as I mentioned at the end, then we're going to have a little bit of a live question and answer session as well, and a chance for one of you to win a manuscript evaluation with us up to the value of $499. So we'll get into a little bit more detail about what that's about later. So just really an introductory note to start. I talk to authors all day long, every day, and, a lot of the anxiety, I guess, about starting a publishing process and starting an editing process comes from that feeling of, what editing is all about. And I think it really has come to symbolize criticism. A lot of people have worked long and hard on their manuscripts, and the idea of handing it over to someone who's going to be there with their red pen, cross things out, tell you what's not needed, is a lot to stomach. So, I think that it's coming to understand that editing is to help you and to get you to the point where you're ready to publish, with help and guidance, but not just about the criticism. We hope to really encourage that author voice and to make sure that the message that you're trying to get across is coming across clearly. So not about tearing something down, for sure, as it says here. It's about helping your work reach its full potential. That is the goal for us and, for our editors as well. So a little bit about our approach here at FriesenPress to editing. So collaborative process, you'll see there, that is the number one thing for us. We want to make sure we understand, what are your goals here? What are you trying to get across with this manuscript? And we want to support you to reach that goal. We use editors who are certified, qualified editors, and they also have to pass really stringent examinations with us. And along with that, we have a wonderful editing coordinator who works with all of our editors and is really responsible for checking the quality of the work. So it's really, really important to us that you're getting a fantastic service and that it is from a qualified professional editor, for sure. So a little bit about our editing process here at FriesenPress. So our editing process always starts with a manuscript evaluation. So that is when one of our professional editors, and what we do is we get information as a publishing consultant. I'll learn about your manuscript, and you'll tell me about the genre and any questions that you would like to ask of an editor. And then what we do is we find a good fit for you. We find a perfect editor who can edit in your particular genre, and they are first going to read your manuscript in its entirety. So at that point, it's not about, correcting the grammar, correcting the spelling. It's about them reading it in full and then writing you usually about a 5-6 page essay on what they think about it. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And what do they recommend for the next steps? It's very difficult to dive into an editing process unless we truly understand and you truly understand what you need next. So absolutely, the first step is getting that feedback from the professional editor. So as we say, the vetted editor will match your manuscript genre and specific needs, and they operate as professional editors do, to an editing accuracy rate of 90 to 95%. That becomes more important as we go through the editing processes following the manuscript evaluation. We'll get into a little bit more detail about that after, but I guess one of the main takeaways is the fact that, I think for a lot of people, they see editing as perhaps, fixing spelling errors, fixing grammatical errors, but it is a lot more than that. It's making sure that your voice is clear and consistent, that there's flow, that the storyline makes sense, there's no plot holes, if it's nonfiction, that the structure works. So it'll be getting comments on that and seeing what type of editing you need next, whether that might be developmental editing, whether that might be content editing, copy editing, or proofreading. We have a whole host of options there. And as I said, we'll get into that a little bit later as well. So a little bit on the traditional publishing process. Like some of our authors will be using us for editing and for publishing. So we would be assisting you to self-publish throughout that journey. We do offer our editing services on a standalone basis as well. So sometimes authors will approach us and use us for editing before they approach, and try for the traditional model. If you do go down that route and you try for traditional publishing and you get accepted, you can expect the editing process with a traditional publishing company to look a little different. So it's ultimately shaped by the publisher's commercial goals, as it says there. So, really a traditional publisher has selected you. They want to get your book out there to share it and for it to be a big success, which is great. But often it means that you're meeting their goals rather than solely your own goals. So it's important to see the differentiation there. The author's original vision is often adjusted, so they may change things. They may insist on certain edits being done, and perhaps you don't have full creative control in that situation as well. So there isn't just so much, in terms of that creative control coming from you as the author in that situation. So a little note on learning to master self-editing. I think one of the biggest questions I get asked whenever I talk to authors who have a completed manuscript is, when am I ready? When am I ready to start the editing process? And, it can be a difficult one to answer. Quite often I'll say to people, like, when you're at the point where, you've been self-editing for so long that you need a break from it, you need some time away, or if you find yourself going in circles, you change something one day, you change it back the next, you're probably at the point where you need that outside perspective at that point. But usually to get to that point, you do have to do some self-editing first. So as it says here, being both the creator and the first critic of your own work is inherently challenging. It can be really tough. So sometimes getting away from it for a while once you complete a manuscript is no bad thing. If you happen to have a nice vacation, something like that, where you can go away, not think about it for a little bit of time and come back, then, absolutely, it means that you're looking at it with fresh eyes. So that can help for sure. And I think it is understanding that once you've written a manuscript, much as it's hard to say, not that that's the easy part done, but expect that there is a journey ahead. I talk to a lot of authors who say, oof, I thought that the hard work was done when I wrote the manuscript, only to get into the editing process. It certainly, takes patience, and usually multiple self-edits before you then get into, a professional editing process as well. So it's being prepared for that. If you can get into that, it means that you are going to, as it says here, improve clarity, reduce structural errors, and make the editing process ahead more productive as well. So effective self-editing starts with distance, as I said. Getting away from it allows you to come back with fresh eyes and be able to look at it more clearly. Start with big picture revisions. So what this means, and I often say this to authors as well, don't get too tied up in the editing too soon. If you're in the process of writing your manuscript, I really encourage you to continue to write that manuscript and complete it before you get into the nitty-gritty of the editing. Otherwise, sometimes it can prevent that flow and prevent you from getting to that, finish line as such. So that would be my one part of advice there. Once that's taken care of, definitely with the self-editing, give yourself different things to review in each round. So first of all, as it says here, big picture revisions. Think about, if it's fiction, for instance, think about the overall storyline. Is it making sense? Are your characters clearly defined? Are they developed fully? Is there any plot holes? Is the ending strong enough? So things like that to think about, and then as it says here, go through that in different stages. Think about, at the end stage, you're going to be looking at it, yes, for grammar and spelling and punctuation, but really that'll come a little bit later after the bigger picture pieces are sorted out there as well. So a little bit here on the different types of editing. I touched on this in one of the previous slides, but we'll just get into a little bit more detail. And different companies, different editing organizations will use different terms. So it's important to get into a bit of detail to understand what these all mean. So the editing that we recommend includes developmental editing, copy editing, content editing, and proofreading as well. So developmental editing, expert commentary and advice on how your content works. Usually what we do when we start with the initial evaluation, you're going to get those comments from the editor, the 5 to 6 pages where they're going to let you know what they think about your manuscript overall. To me, that's a little bit like a little introduction to developmental editing, because you're going to get that kind of feedback. However, within the scope of that service, it would be impossible to touch on every developmental aspect of a manuscript. And that's where sometimes an editor will then recommend that you move forward with the developmental edit next. What that will look like whenever you get it back from the professional editor is it'll look like you'll see your Word document that you submitted for editing, and there will be comments throughout down the right-hand margin. And what you will then do is go through those comments and make decisions on, whether you agree with what the editor is suggesting, whether you want to make those changes, and then go ahead and make changes. So at this stage, you're not really getting into the details of are all my words spelled correctly, and is the grammar correct? Because at this point you're looking at it from a higher level, and you're wanting to make those bigger changes that are going to get this manuscript ready for that next stage. So sometimes what our editors will recommend is a content edit instead of a developmental edit. Now, normally where you'll see that recommendation is if there is A need for smaller developmental changes that can also be implemented at the same time as they take care of copy editing. And what the copy editing is taking care of more of the technical aspect of editing: grammar, spelling, punctuation, syntax. So that would all be done within one round of editing, rather than starting with developmental editing and moving forward with copy editing next. So as I've mentioned there, then copy editing. So sometimes that will follow developmental editing, or sometimes copy editing might be all your manuscript needs. If the editor reads it and they think it's in good shape and it needs to be polished for publication, then that's where they could recommend a copy edit. So we do have a lot of, systems, supports that can help whenever we're preparing a manuscript, to help make sure there are less grammatical and spelling errors. I will say that no matter how good your system that you're using is, there's no substitute for a human going through it line by line and making sure that your grammar and spelling and punctuation are in good shape. Proofreading, that's really a final sweep, as it says there, and we do recommend that in each and every case if possible, because as I mentioned in an earlier slide, editing accuracy rate sits at about 90 to 95%. Even as humans who are highly qualified, there can be things that get through with an editing round, so multiple editing rounds our best case scenario. And usually what you want, and what we do here at FriesenPress, is we will have a new editor who will be the proofreader, so that it's fresh eyes on a manuscript. Whether it's your own eyes on your own manuscript, you're not going to see those errors anymore, because you're so close to the content that your brain will see what it wants to see at that stage. And same thing if you've had an editor who has done multiple rounds of editing for you. Best case is to have a new proofreader who can go through that line by line and make sure it's really is polished for publication. It really makes the difference. And I'm sure a lot of you can relate, but I know for me, if I'm reading a book and I see a spelling error on page 1, page 2 of the book, it certainly, there's something that goes off there that, you start to question what you're reading. So I think, you really want to make sure that you have a real polished manuscript to proceed with, for sure. So a little bit here on emotional management. Talking with authors all day long, every day, a lot of you have worked on these manuscripts for a long time, for many years. I've heard often, it's my baby. It's hard to let it go. And I feel that. I understand that completely. And it does mean that sometimes whenever you start the editing process, it could be really tough. Sometimes editors are going to provide, constructive guidance and make suggestions as to, what they think that they can suggest that'll make that a better manuscript. And sometimes, when we let our emotions, play, it can really affect how we respond to that. So I think, it's important to recognize that and to completely understand that that's valid. But at the same time, really understanding that your editor is there to support you in this journey. And their goal, as always, is to make this the best possible book. So they're trying to support you in whatever way they can. The really nice thing about the self-publishing process with editing, though, is that you, as the author, are the one who's in control. You make the calls. So, I'll have this conversation often with our authors as well. An editor might suggest something, and you might not entirely agree with that. You might think, well, I like it the way it is, or I don't want to cut that character. I like that character in my manuscript. If that's the case, that is a choice that you can make. So it's very important to understand that, and to understand that's within your control. So as it says here, editors or readers are offering guidance and not commands. So, they're helping, but truly you make the call. So a little bit on the practical benefits of self-published editing. So as I've just mentioned there, the creative control, that's a big one. And as I mentioned, with traditional publishing, not always often the case. So it's nice to know that the manuscript that you have written, that you've spent a lot of time on, will go out into the world as you wish. So that's truly the goal with self-publishing and with the editing side of things as well, and certainly different than what you get with traditional publishing. It's definitely a very collaborative process. We're going to provide that advice, we're going to provide the support and guidance, but we can be flexible to meet your needs as well. And really, truly, I find like for our authors going through this editing process, getting that feedback from the professional editors is certainly a way to build the confidence in what you have done, what you've achieved so far, and what you're going to do next. So I think even entering into a process like this can really, make you see that there is a way forward for sure. So a little bit on preparing for the editing process. Again, another question that I get quite often. A lot of people write in so many different ways. I've written notes on my phone, or I need to write physically with a pen and paper to get those feelings out. Or I have some old program on my computer. So many people working in different ways. End result, really, no matter how you're going to go into that editing process and publishing process, is usually that you'll need to get your manuscript into one single Microsoft Word document. That's the starting point, really. And ideally, you want it to be a clean, as it says here, copy and paste your manuscript into a new blank document. You want it to be free from formatting issues, and I'm sure that many of you, like myself, have a love-hate relationship with Microsoft Word because it doesn't always do what you want it to do each time. So starting with a clean document will certainly help. It says here, avoid uncommon or decorative fonts. Really think of this Word document as a way, first of all, to get this to your editor who's going to read it. If you're thinking about using some kind of decorative font in the published book, that'll come later in the design stages. For editing, you want this to be as easy to read as possible for your editor. So we always recommend, standard font size, 10 to 12, and regular kind of font. It doesn't have to be Arial or Times New Roman, but something similar really seems to work best and is easiest to read for sure. The foundation of a clean manuscript is structure and readability. Yeah, so you're trying to make the job as easy as possible for your editor. Okay. So a little bit more about preparing for the editing process. So a well-organized manuscript is easier for editors to navigate. Something that helps with that is consistency. Consistency is a big part of preparing the document, and that can be things like making sure that you have the same font size throughout. If your chapter headings are in bold and size 14, make sure they're all that way. And as we mentioned, staying away from those decorative fonts as well. You can also use page breaks for new sections. That really helps. And setting your language preferences as well will really help. And that's a question that comes up a lot. We talk to people all over the world, but a lot within Canada and the United States. And some are using Canadian spelling, some are using British spelling, some are using US spelling. So there's not one right or wrong. It's making a decision on what you want to use. And sometimes that can be influenced by where your audience is. If you think you're going to be selling the book mostly, within the Canadian market, then perhaps it makes sense to have Canadian spelling there. But that is something that you can decide. And once you do decide that, we can let your editor know so that they stick to that. The biggest part of all here is that it's consistent. You can also run your manuscript through grammar, spelling checks, like we said. That certainly helps. Doesn't pick up everything. And as I mentioned, no replacement for a human qualified editor, but certainly a good starting point to clean up any errors that may exist there for starting. Well-prepared references save time for both you and your editor. So if you're working on like a nonfiction manuscript, the likelihood is that you're going to be including your references either as footnotes, endnotes, maybe have a bibliography to share as well. Again, the important thing is consistency. So it's you making sure you're using a style guide, for instance. The Chicago Manual of Style is a big one, but there are others as well. Again, it's choosing which one is the most appropriate and letting us know so that our editors can stick to that process throughout as well. And that really makes a difference. And making sure that your references are all there. You know, if they are not there, that's when an editor in that initial stage is going to let you know what you need as a next step as well. So there certainly is, you know, a little bit of work to do in preparing the manuscript, but really I try to say to people, keeping it as simple as possible is key. You know, that single Microsoft Word document is your starting point, and we can help from there. So before we get to the question and answer session, we've got a chance to win a free manuscript evaluation. So Brian's also going to pop the link into the chat if anybody has trouble with that QR code, but fingers crossed that works as well if you can access that one. It's really a chance, as we said, for that initial step from a professional editor, you know, to read your manuscript, to give you feedback and direction on next steps. So a really good opportunity to, you know, get into that initial step as well. So hopefully we can get you all entering that, and there'll be one lucky winner that we'll be in touch with pretty quickly to let you know that's who our winner is. So good luck with that one, everybody. And we're just about to bring things over to Brian here so that we can do our question and answer session. Looking forward to getting into any of the questions that have come up during this session as well. Now, if any of you do have questions that we don't get to today, or you would like to chat further with me about your projects or next steps, then certainly make a note of my details there when you get a chance. I'm available to chat and to answer any questions, you know, whatever stage of the process you're at. I think that's always important. Like I talk to so many different authors, you know, when they're exploring all their options, and always happy to help and share any knowledge that I can. So it's great to have a chance to chat with you all today, and hopefully in the future. And I'm going to throw this over to Brian now so he can help with our questions.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks so much, Debbie. That was really great overview of a very, very important part of the process. And I actually wanted to start not with a comment, but or not with a question rather, but rather a great comment from Pia. Pia was bringing the heat here, said, I'm so tired of helping friends by ordering books that they self-publish and constantly disturbed by the lack of editing and the inconsistencies. I never finished the book. And I just wanted to kind of reflect on that, because it is truly something that has kind of plagued the self-publishing industry for quite a while, that the books aren't up to a professional standard that readers expect. Pia really illustrated that, and I just wanted to note that, because you know, that's what we're here to talk about today, is the importance of it. And just because you're self-publishing doesn't mean that you shouldn't have that same traditional level experience or expertise behind your book. So thanks for leaving that comment, Pia, and I just wanted to give you your moment in the sun here, because I really appreciated that. There are truly a ton of questions as usual. You guys always bring a lot of really great perspectives and thoughts. So I wanted to actually start by asking, this was from Trevor, and it was kind of about, I guess, the how many rounds of editing maybe an author can expect their book to take. I know there's a huge caveat there if every project is different, but I was also maybe thinking if you could maybe talking about the traditional uh, editing experience that has many different rounds and how sort of self-publishing authors might approximate that.
Absolutely, yeah. So definitely the key is multiple, if at all possible. We know we're always working, with usually what is best for your manuscript, and usually for a lot of us, with what the budget allows for. So it's finding the compromise and the middle ground there where it works for you. With traditional publishing, it can be as many as 7 to 8 rounds of editing, so it can be a lot. And certainly there's the possibility to do as much as you want with us, but we always recommend usually at least 3, including our initial evaluation. So we do the initial evaluation. Minimal would be something like a copy edit next and a proofread, but certainly that can shift and move if you do a round of developmental editing first before your copy editing, or if you do some editing and switch your path and decide on a different path as well. So there are options available. A service that I love that we have available as well to our authors is, consulting directly with your editor if there is that need, and having a call and going over their feedback. Sometimes, especially in the case of something like a developmental edit, they may make suggestions, that either you're not quite understanding, or perhaps, you're not quite seeing the value in making the change that the editor suggests, and getting on the phone with the editor and talking through that to come to some kind of consensus can be a really good way to go as well. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, great. I did want to mention really quickly, and this is a little bit late, and I apologize if you have a hand cramp from trying to take a bunch of notes from this, but we will be sending a replay out tomorrow. You'll get a replay of this session in your inbox. So apologies if you've been frantically capturing notes and trying to, while listening, but you'll be able to get a replay so you can watch that as much as you like. So just wanted to mention that really quickly. Getting back to questions here, we have one from Tom, and this was a pretty early question, but we mentioned the editing accuracy rate, the industry standard of 90 to 95%. I think, it's kind of part and parcel with the multiple rounds of editing, catching mistakes and errors that might come through. So are you able to speak on that industry rate and how we sort of approach that?
Yeah. So it is down to the fact that that our editors are human, very highly qualified humans, I will say, but there still is that chance that there might be a spelling error that's missed or something like that along the way, and that can happen and is considered normal within the industry. Now, if there are a lot of errors, that would be something to address, and certainly not something we accept here at FriesenPress. So we do have that high level that we expect. But if you do have multiple rounds of editing, it's certainly going to mean that you can expect by the end of the process and by the time you're getting into the design stages and working on publishing that manuscript, that there should be very, very few errors, and that's certainly what we inform what we want to see.
Yeah, and I think important too, not only that's the industry standard as well. So in traditional space, it's similar. Yeah. Great. Got a question here, and I'll try to maybe bundle a few of these questions together. Hagar asked, when it comes to editing, specifically genres that are quite niche, do you provide editors from specific backgrounds that could support the writer's journey without erasing the originality or core essence of what the author's saying? I ask this as someone who writes intersectionally. I'm looking for editors who can see the vision and help me get there. We had a few questions from authors with maybe specialized or niche manuscripts, and I think that it's important to dig into that for our process, especially, and how we match authors up with the right person.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're currently working with over 50 editors, and we have someone in the role who is our editing coordinator, and it's her job to, to ensure that we have editors in many different genres as we publish books across all genres, really. And she does a fantastic job at that. It would be rare that I get a request from someone in a specific genre that we can't support. It's very, very niche. Sometimes you might find the case that, that you might be the subject matter expert there, and an editor might not know as much on your particular subject, although they can still support. And that's why, as well, starting with that initial evaluation for us is key. Because not only is it a chance to get some initial feedback on your manuscript, it's also a really good opportunity to see, did we get it right? Did we get that right fit for the editor? Do you feel like they understood your manuscript and they know the path that you should go down next? And do you agree with that? If in the rare instance that wasn't the case, certainly would look at other options for sure. But I guess the general answer is yes, we're employing across the genres so that we can help, with most manuscripts for sure.
Absolutely. Kind of in staying in that genre space, had a question here from Becky who asks, how is the editing process different for children's books compared to longer form fiction and nonfiction? I think that's a great question that
Yeah.
maybe people assume children's books don't need editing, but kind of couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a question I love to answer. And really, I think it is. A lot of people will say to us, "Oh, well, my children's book is 500 words. How can that take an editor, the same amount of time to prepare an evaluation as a 60,000 word novel?" And I'll say because it's a different skill set, and for the children's books, it's a specific children's book editor who's going to be reading your manuscript and preparing that feedback. They look at different things. They're going to look at, how have you written this book for the specific target audience? Like if this is a picture book for 3 to 5, 6-year-olds, is the language that you're using correct for that audience? If there's rhyming, does it rhyme well? Is there good rhythm and cadence? Does that need to be changed? Is the overall idea of the book something that target audience can understand? And matching that up, do you need more detail, less detail, and really making sure it is right for the target audience. So that's one thing that they're really, really good at. And they can also help with making sure that the length of it is right for a children's book. That's something that's so important. If you are again creating a picture book, no 4 or 5-year-old that I know is going to sit through a 50-page children's picture book for sure, no matter how good it is. So I think it's about making sure that you get all of those parts right, and get the feedback from somebody who really understands the children's market as well.
Absolutely. Got a question here from Pamela. Pamela asks, how long does it take for an edit of a manuscript that is around 200 pages? So I think just giving a bit of a frame of reference for maybe the different editing types, if some take longer than others.
Yeah, sure. So generally for that initial evaluation that we start with, usually would have feedback back from the editor within around 2 weeks, I would say would be the standard. And then our process, generally you're looking at about 3 to 4 weeks for each round of editing. And again, it depends. Like you say, 200 pages is pretty regular. If you've got a book and it's 600 pages, you can expect that might take a little bit longer for the editor to get through. If it's developmental editing, a little bit more in depth as well. But something like a proofread, probably within 2 to 3 weeks. And some of that does depend as well on editor availability and editor workloads as well. So we work through that. But generally, when you're coming and you're working through our process, we do have timelines that we will do our best to stick to so that you are on a schedule and you can anticipate when you'll be through that editing process.
Great. Wanted to give another shout out to a comment from Jamie here. Jamie says, all books have errors. J.K. Rowling's do. L.M. Montgomery do. Editors are human. Can't agree more. And, we believe they should be human here at FriesenPress. So just wanted to check that out, and thank you for the comment, Jamie. And kind of speaking about or alluding to the AI kind of boogeyman, we did have a couple questions about kind of our feelings. That both of the questions I found were about our feelings about using AI, either in the self-editing stage or for manuscript review. So I think we had a feeling that this would come up, and it usually does, no matter what topic we're presenting on in these webinars. So if you want to speak on that for a moment.
Sure. The AI discussion is a hot topic right now, I would say, and certainly something that I find I'm talking to authors about day in, day out, really. It really is a big subject. And, I would say our vision, our feelings here at FriesenPress is that humans do the job and do it well, and there's nothing that can replace that. That being said, we understand as well the role that AI is playing in this world today, and how it can support authors, and a lot of our authors use AI for, like you say, the self-editing process, in some form or other. For many years, we've been using things like Grammarly and tools like that, that are essentially AI. It just hasn't got to the level that we're seeing today. So there's a big difference for us in using AI to support, to help with editing, even help with structure and organization versus, plugging a few lines into an AI system to generate a manuscript. Very, very different indeed. So our vision is that, yes, we understand that tools are going to be used to support with some level of AI, but here at FriesenPress, we have a human process, and we do not use AI in any of our editing processes. I hope that helps and answers the question. I know it's a tricky one for sure.
Yeah, certainly. We posted a blog post recently as well for people who have used generative AI to create either the manuscript or sections of it, the doors that close to you if you do that, things like book awards, copyrightability, all these kind of foundational things that are important to books and manuscripts that are a lot more difficult to it's more difficult to claim ownership over a manuscript if you're using that. And it's certainly something that we are principled on our side that we don't use those tools in the publication of our authors' books. We're keeping the human side focused. So there's a statement also that just went up on our About Us page as well, if you want to learn a little bit more about our perspective on that.
Absolutely. And I find as well, it's an ever-changing conversation. So, the conversations that we're having today, and talking about what's possible in the publishing world, putting books out there that have been generated with AI, that could change, and that could be different in 6 months or a year or in 2 years. So, I always say to people, if that's the route that you're considering, proceed with caution and be aware of that,
Absolutely. Well, that's a great maybe accidental, but kind of perfect transition to the next question here. We have one from Monique, who asks, maybe I'm too paranoid, but I've always worried about sharing my content with anyone in case they turn around and publish it themselves. This happened to an acquaintance of mine in a Hay House writing group. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have said the name. In a writing group. How do we learn to trust an editor? And kind of getting back to that, managing the experience and the emotionality of that. That trust factor of giving the manuscript over is an important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear that a lot. And I think it is, you're right to be cautious in the sense that, you shouldn't be emailing your manuscript here, there, and everywhere to, everybody that you've approached to talk about publishing with. So it's being aware of that, making sure that you feel comfortable with the company that you're dealing with. And I know that can be hard to establish sometimes too, but, doing your research, check Google reviews, check Better Business Bureau, make sure the company that you're dealing with is legit, and that you feel that you've got trust with the person that you're working with. And then something that we won't do is we won't ask you to email a manuscript to us, because that's not the most secure way to do it either. So you would always be uploading it through a secure, password protected site to get it to our editing team. So I know that doesn't totally take away, all of the anxiety around sharing it. But I think it's the first step is just making sure you feel like you've got trust and you trust the company.
100%. I'm just popping the link to the contest in the chat again. I had a couple of people asking if we could put the QR code back up, but just clicking that link in the chat will take you there, and you can fill out the form, and maybe you'll be one of our lucky winners. Got a question here from Craig. It's a great question. Deb is a very talented woman. I don't know if she'll be able to answer this one because she doesn't edit at the books. But Craig was asking, what are the most common issues your editors see with authors, particularly first-time authors, with regard to content? He gave examples of narration, description, dialogue. So, are there anything that you can think of, Deb, that would?
Yeah, a lot of issues with dialogue, a lot of advice on show, don't tell. It comes back from our editors for sure. I think if it's the first time that you're writing a book, then generally, you're going to get some feedback on the overall storyline, making sure it matches, making sure that you don't have characters that, that you introduce at some point that you don't follow through with. You see that a lot. And plot holes, things that you don't pick up on yourself, that a seasoned writer, might think of. So I'd say that's the starting point, is things like that. And having a professional editor's outside viewpoint on it can make you see those things that maybe you've been too close to see.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Deb. I have a question here from Paul, and I might take a slightly different direction. So Paul says, this is my first book. I need a professional editing. I'm not quite finished, but I'm getting good feedback from beta readers. My problem is I want it to be a series. Don't know if I have enough now to turn this into different books. It's at 215 pages on his computer. So I think this is maybe an opportunity to talk about where an editor or even a book coach can come in and give some feedback early on, maybe before they're finished, to help them sort of suss out how to turn that project into something publishable.
Absolutely. If you're at that stage and you're hoping to develop a series, book coaching might be a good option at that stage to get you to the stage where you have a first completed manuscript, but also the book coach can help you see where perhaps there are other storylines that you can develop further in the other series. So, how you're introducing a little bit of a teaser to those to get people interested to buy the next one. So that would be a good idea to consider, and certainly a service that we offer and we can provide more information on if you'd like. If you're at the stage where you're almost completed that manuscript, and you just needed that push for how to complete and move on in the editing process, that's when perhaps, closer to the finish line, you could consider that initial evaluation. We have done that evaluation for people whenever their manuscripts aren't complete. If you're at that point where you're just really stuck and you feel like you can't get to the finish line, then certainly feedback at that stage can, even if we're to repeat that step later. But it's a good starting point regardless. I will say with things like series and thinking about that, my thoughts are that you should go through the whole process of editing your book, working through the publishing process and getting a book out there, making it available before then starting on the second book, because it's important to go through that whole journey, see what it's like, see what you like about it, see what you might want to change for the second book, and then move forward from there. And then you might get a little bit faster in the process if you're doing multiple, like second, third, fourth, fifth books. But definitely working through that process with one book first, I think, is very important.
Yeah, totally. Have a question here from Pamela. It might be the second question we've had from you, Pamela, but they asked, is the cost of the edit dependent on the number of pages or word count?
Yeah, so with us, it's all based on word count. With the initial evaluation service, we have certain brackets, so like 50,000 words and under, and 50 to 90,000 words and so on. There's not really a manuscript that's too big for us to do the evaluation on, but certainly there would be overages that would apply. Our standard cost in that offer that we have going today is for a manuscript that's under 50,000 words, but certainly something we can look at, if you happen to have a little bit more than that. And the standard pricing for that is $499, and then there's overages that apply from there. For the rest of our editing services, they're all based on a certain cost per 100 words. So like copy editing is $2.50 per 100 words and so on. And on our website, there's a link to our editing services where you can see a complete breakdown of those costs. And if anybody needs help doing the math, that's a fun thing for me to do. So happy to help anybody that wants help with that. Keeps the brain ticking over,
There you go, the human calculator, Debbie Anderson. I have a question here from Elizabeth, who asks, what if you want to get traditionally published and maybe not self-publish? Would you recommend hiring editors to get ready to send your manuscript out to agents?
Yeah, and we do that quite a lot for people who are exploring the traditional publishing world. Trying to get an agent these days so that you can access that whole world has become increasingly difficult. So sometimes, depends on what you're writing, depends on, if you've got a great following on social media already, or you happen to be famous or a politician, something like that, you're in a better position to get them interested. But otherwise, you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward whenever you approach that agent. So a manuscript that has, being professionally edited is your best bet. So sometimes, we'll go through that process with an author. They'll go off, try to find their agent and sail off into the sunset. For some, we don't hear from them again. So hopefully they did. For others, maybe it's 6 months, a year later, they'll come back and want to talk to us a little bit more about the rest of the process if they didn't manage to achieve that goal of traditional publishing. But yes, definitely trying to approach them with a polished manuscript is a good place to be in for sure.
Absolutely. Have another question here. This one's from Ray Lynn. Ray Lynn asks, is there a long time to wait to get into the queue for editing? So if someone after this call is interested and wants to get a standalone editing service, sort of what kind of timelines would they be looking at?
Because we have over 50 editors across the genres, it's normally quite quick. So, if you're interested in starting that process, as I said, we always start with that initial evaluation service. But, if you're interested in getting started with that, we can get you started right away, basically.
There you go. You just wanted to remind people too, we have a few more questions here. I don't know if we're going to get to all of them, but fire away if you have anything on your mind. We certainly want to hear it, and we'll have one of our colleagues, if not Debbie, follow up with you after to make sure that you're getting the answers you need. There's a lot of various ones in here, but yeah, absolutely slide into that Q&A chat with your questions. So let's see here. What are we going to do? Okay, so we got a question from Jerica. Jerica asks, my book is currently at 125,000 words. Would an editor be able to turn that into 3 books? And how many words is the average of one fantasy novel? So kind of similar to Paul's query a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say fantasy novels tend to be longer, especially the first, because usually you're setting the stall for, that fantasy world. So there's a lot of explanation that's needed. So they do tend to be longer. My thoughts, just speaking from your word count, is that it's on the long side for one book, but certainly it wouldn't make 3 normally. I'd say the best thing to do would be to have the professional editor read it in its entirety at 125,000, and they would be able to give you guidance to say, yes, this is one book, and maybe it needs to be reduced in some way, maybe not, or could it become 2 books? But my thoughts are that they probably wouldn't recommend splitting it into more than, it might even just be 1 book.
Yeah, and from a marketability standpoint too, I know sometimes talk about, certainly within the fantasy genre space, there's more of an appetite for a larger book, but sometimes for first-time authors, having a bit more of a leaner volume can be a way of opening a few more doors for you if the book doesn't look quite as big of a time investment, or that can just help too, and keeping production costs kind of manageable too. So a few
Yeah,
different factors to think about. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Sometimes, you find if you're trying to get, first book, you're trying to get your name out there, you're trying to establish a brand and get people interested. It's like you say, somebody mentioned J.K. Rowling, like she can put anything out there these days, and, our biggest fans are going to buy it regardless of the size, but if you're a new author and you're putting a book out there and it's, 500 pages, you've got to ask a higher retail price for that book because it's going to cost more to print. So you're introducing a barrier to sale right away. Whereas if you can keep it at a reasonable level and a reasonable price point to get your audience interested, to get them engaged, hopefully, by the time you get to the second or third book, perhaps if they're a bit longer, it doesn't matter so much. But Brian makes a good point there that keeping it a little bit less for the first one is a good call for sure.
Yeah, it's the battle of art versus commerce. Can be a tough one to wage for new authors who are getting into this space, but all something. It's a good thing to keep in mind for sure. Had a couple questions here, one from Louise and one from Leanne about projects that have a graphical component, whether it's a children's book or a graphic novel. If the imagery is needed to go alongside that book in full, so having a fully laid out graphic novel or a children's book with the text and images, or if one can have just the text or edited independently without having that graphic ready.
Yeah, so for children's books, generally, like, in our process for publishing, you can come to us with illustrations or have illustrations done with us for the editing process. Normally, we just need your single Word document, and it doesn't matter so much about the illustrations at that stage. Graphic novels are a little bit more complex because normally we don't have a service that offers illustrations for graphic novels. So you would be providing those to us, usually in the form of like a PDF or something like that. But if you wanted to go through the editing process first, you would need to provide the editing in a Word document that then you would go and put the changes into your PDF. So it might be a better situation to provide us with both a Word and a PDF, whenever you're at the starting point of editing, so that we can see your vision. But you would certainly be the one that's putting those changes into the PDF.
That was a great question. Thank you both for asking it. And maybe we'll wrap up with this one just because it's so perfect to end on this note. Glenn asks, how do you know when a manuscript is ready for a professional review? Are there minimum steps an author should be taking prior to submitting to ensure you're getting full value from the process? So I know kind of able to synthesize a few different things about the process, self-editing, preparing a manuscript, but kind of knowing when to bring in a professional can be a skill, a learned skill in itself. So yeah, maybe we can end on that note.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say you don't want to wait too long. I've talked to people who have, sat on it for years and have gone over it and over it to the point where they don't want to look at it any longer. They don't want feedback on it. They don't want to make changes anymore, because they're just so sick of the whole thing. And in my view, I think, at that point you have waited too long. So don't get to that point. At the same time, you want to make sure, as Brian says, you've done some self-editing, so you get to the end of writing that manuscript, probably the next day isn't the time when you want the editor to read it, because, even if you go through that and read it one more time yourself, you're going to find things that you want to change and so on. So I think you want to have done some level of self-editing, but it doesn't need to be perfection. Be aware of what you've self-edited, what you're still planning to change, but at the point where you're still open to hear from a professional editor, and really where you need that direction, where you're trying to work out what is my next step, like where should I go from here? Because that's what I find that initial evaluation does. No matter if you get the feedback from the editor and you follow every recommendation that they make, or whether you you get that feedback and you think, wow, I've got to go away and revise this for another year and then come back, you're still getting something out of that service that is going to drive you forward on your journey. And that's the important point, I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's, yeah. And that, I mean, that's a perfect place to wrap up, I think, just because we're at the top of the hour here. And I know some people are on their lunch breaks right now. So we'll maybe call it there. As I mentioned, thanks so much, everyone, for the great questions. They're always super energizing. It's always really fun to chat with y'all in the Q&A. So I really appreciate that and how active it was. Thank you for being here and taking some time out of your day to learn with us. We'll be back at it next month as well. So be on the lookout for your invite to that training session on a book proposal. We're going to break that down and how to kind of use that to your advantage. And Deb, maybe you can send us off as we sign out here.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for attending. Thanks for being here to listen, and always happy to help with questions, whether at the webinars or after. So thanks for your time today, and look forward to hearing from you all soon.
See you next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye.